we're breaking down your fantasy football winners and losers from early free agency day, the negotiating period, the used to be the legal tampering period, plus a couple of these massive trades that have gone down. There has been a ton of action in fantasy football, players changing teams, players stepping into new roles, players potentially taking on more volume and more prominent roles on new teams. We saw it last year. Lots of players hit as free agents. Geno Smith, career year. Darnell Mooney, bounced back completely. Sam Darnold, career year. And that's on top of guys like Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, running backs who switched teams and absolutely crushed. We have to keep an open mind when players switch teams. When a team tells you the truth about what they think about a player on the open market, this is how you find fantasy football ADP winners.
What? Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Let's talk about Deebo Samuel. Well, the whole week sort of started off with Deebo Samuel getting moved to Washington. This kind of opened up the floodgates for more and more moves to drop. But the Deebo Samuel one's interesting. What did Washington Commanders lack last year? A wide receiver too. Guys like Olamide Zaccheaus, guys like Diami Brown, guys like Noah Brown, sort of in this rotation for the wide receiver 2 spot. Terry McLaurin, career year, unbelievable chemistry with Jaden Daniels, set the all-time record for the Washington Commanders / Washington football team / Washington Redskins all-time record, broke all sorts of records for the most touchdown grabs. So Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, fantastic. But who's on the other side? Now they have Deebo Samuel. And Deebo showed some signs last year of regression, but this is a bounce back spot. You have an elite young quarterback in Jaden Daniels, had the second most fantasy football points all time for a rookie last year, took Washington to the NFC Championship game. Now this is a potential Deebo bounce back spot. Another thing Washington lacked, yak. This is not a team that had a whole lot of yak. And if you think about them from a perspective, they were top 4 in rushing yards as a team. Jaden Daniels, second in rushing yards, the quarterback position. Then Terry McLaurin had a number of touchdown grabs. But when you think about the intermediate receivers, guys like Eckler, guys like Zach Ertz, all those wide receivers we talked about, there isn't a whole lot of catch the ball and go and boogie with it. Deebo Samuel still gives you some of that. Deebo Samuel still has juice with the yak. Deebo Samuel, it can still be used on manufactured running plays. So the Washington offense gets better. Deebo Samuel gets a bailout in one of his best possible landing spots. Stay with the trades, DK Metcalf. And wow, DK Metcalf, Pittsburgh really, really showed their cards just how much they want DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf gets a massive, massive contract extension. This is a player where Pittsburgh ends up sending the 52nd overall pick to get DK Metcalf. So this is a pretty decent price to pay for him. Then you factor in the fact that they're paying him a huge contract, where this is Pittsburgh's offense now. Pittsburgh is a DK Metcalf offense. They're showing you this by trading for him and then paying him the bag. And this happens the same time that Najee Harris leaves, where they could go into next season with Jaylen Warren as the starting running back. And I love Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren is really, really a talented player on a per-touch basis, but the volume he would absorb and the sort of offense you can run is a little different than with Najee. Now, DK Metcalf, people are going to say, Theo, wait a second. George Pickens, you're reading this wrong, man. George Pickens is still there in the building. To me, this is a signal that George Pickens' days are numbered in Pittsburgh. Now, are they numbered for a year? Maybe. Maybe Pickens plays this season in Pittsburgh, but George Pickens, they're going to have to extend. George Pickens, this is the year where he's sort of due a contract. And when it comes to Pickens, I don't think Pittsburgh is going to extend him. There's no way that they're going to spend this much money on 2 wide receivers with sort of overlapping skill sets. So is George Pickens talented? Yes. Do the Steelers view George Pickens the same as DK Metcalf? Absolutely not, because they went out and got a guy who has a sort of overlapping skill set. Now, when we look at DK Metcalf in a context that George Pickens is not there, then we start getting a little excited. And with all due respect to Arthur Smith narrative, this is Mike Tomlin's team. And Mike Tomlin is a huge voice there. So if the offense needs to sort of shift to feature a wide receiver, we've seen that with Mike Tomlin teams back in the Ben Roethlisberger era. Could we see it this year? So Arthur Smith, of course, nobody gets more than 115, 120 targets in a season with him. But if we look at the specific usage that Pickens had a 44% air yard share, a 23% target share. This was a player, if you put DK in that role, DK is going to do well. This is a bounce back spot for DK. Let's talk about Davante Adams. Davante Adams signs with the LA Rams. Davante Adams basically steps into the Cooper Kupp role. And to steal one from my co-host at School of Scott Barrett, he's going to do a better Cooper Kupp than Cooper Kupp. Davante Adams averaged 17 points per game last season. Think about that. 32 years old, but still a 17 point per game scorer at the wide receiver position last year. Now, was he getting hyper targeted by Aaron Rodgers? Sure. But good wide receivers get hyper targeted. That is fantasy football in a nutshell. But Davante Adams has been just ageless. The guy doesn't age. The guy continually puts up numbers. Was very, very good in Las Vegas. Very, very good on a point per game basis with the Jets. Of course, the Jets had some consistency issues, but Davante Adams, especially down the stretch last year, looked really, really good. Now steps into the Cooper Kupp role. And let's talk about that Cooper Kupp role, because Puka Nacua is the wide receiver one. Don't get it twisted. This is not going to be a Davante leaping Puka Nacua. But Davante in that wide receiver 2 role there, you're talking about a player who's going to get a 25, 26% target share. And that's what Kupp had last year. Kupp had a 26% target share last year. And when it comes to Sean McVay offenses, if there is an advantageous matchup for a player, that player will get targeted over and over and over again. So the spike week potential is there for Adams to put up some really, really big numbers in this offense. The Rams retain Matt Stafford, go get Davante Adams. This is fantastic for them. And we'll keep an eye on Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is going to be going somewhere. That's one of the other next dominoes to fall. Does he end up in New England? Does he end up in Jacksonville? There's a number of spots where you can paint a picture for Cooper Kupp landing in, but we don't have clarity on that situation. We will soon. So we talked about DK, we talked about Deebo, we talked about Davante Adams. Let's talk about some quarterbacks, because we had quarterback shifting as well. Side note, Aaron Rodgers is going to end up being a Pittsburgh Steeler, would be the way I would bet the situation runs. If this was somebody covering like an election, we would say that we can project this is going to go to Aaron Rodgers, because it seems like both sides want this. It seems like it's going to happen. And the DK Metcalf trade sort of indicates that they want to go for it with a quarterback like this. And we saw Justin Fields move on. Justin Fields wanted to guarantee that he'd be the starter, ends up signing with the New York Jets. Justin Fields is back. And the real life football people are going to say Justin Fields is not that good. The guy loses NFL games. There's plenty of non-fantasy people who are going to point at Justin Fields and say this guy's just not good. And we're not talking about NFL. Do I think Justin Fields is going to elevate the Jets and win 11 games next year? No. But do I think Justin Fields is going to put up fantasy numbers? Absolutely. And Justin Fields right now, in a very short sample size, is 23rd all-time in rushing yardage at the quarterback position. And that number is going to go up and up and up this year, because Justin Fields has room to run in this offense. He's a perfect bridge quarterback for the Jets, where if they want to draft a quarterback at 7, they can still do that, because they're paying Justin Fields a 2-year, $40 million deal. Or if they want to pass on this class completely, they'll go with Justin Fields and Tyrod Taylor as his backup. Justin Fields, this is a great stat. Over his last 24 starts, he has 11 top 5 weeks in fantasy scoring. And with this team, I think that's going to happen. Now, how about winners and losers on the Jets? I think Breece Hall's a loser. And there's a lot of pushback on this, where people are going to say, Theo, you don't know ball. This is going to be a running quarterback, and all this is going to do is open up running lanes for Breece Hall. Breece Hall to the moon. Breece Hall is going to rip off 50-yard runs, 40-yard runs. It's going to be the Breece Hall show. He's going to be so efficient as a runner. Maybe. I don't know. This one is, I mean, if you're banking on long runs as your argument for a guy's fantasy value, like, there's outs there, sure. But when it comes down to it, when was Breece Hall most effective as a fantasy asset? When he was catching passes. RB2 overall finish in 2023. And what did he do? Led all running backs in receptions that year. High 70s receiving total. What happens last year? Last year, the points per game go down because he only caught 57 passes, 55 passes. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but the reception total went down with Breece Hall last year. Now, does Justin Fields strike you as a quarterback who's going to continually check down over and over again to the running back? I think there'll be some design targets for Breece Hall. The Jets are not stupid, and they know Breece Hall is a good receiver. But I think when it's a situation where you have an opportunistic scrambler like Fields as well, where Fields can put his head down and go get yardage, that sort of factors into the dump down, make a short pass to the running back, or take off and get a couple of yards. That's constantly going to be a decision with the quarterback. Whereas if the Jets had ended up with a Russell Wilson type, would that have opened up more targets for Breece Hall? So for me, is Breece Hall still an RB1? Sure. I think he's an RB1. I think he's a very talented player. But do I think Breece Hall can break through and have a season where he challenges guys like Saquon Barkley, Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, and certainly Devon Achane? I would bet on all those guys ahead of Breece Hall in the fantasy scoring this year. I could be wrong. So that already puts him at RB6. And there's plenty of guys, Christian McCaffrey, Bucky Irving, Chase Brown, Josh Jacobs, keep going down the list, James Cook, a lot of running back competition. So at the end of the day, Breece Hall to me takes a little bit of a hit. Now the Garrett Wilson one, this one's weird because people are acting like Garrett Wilson can't replicate what he did last year and sort of be the same guy. So like when it comes to Garrett Wilson, you have the shower narrative, the locker room narrative where Justin Fields and him played together for 2 years at Ohio State. Garrett Wilson has spoken glowingly about Justin Fields whenever he's been asked about him. I don't know if they're friends, but they certainly have a ton of respect for one another and seem like they both really enjoyed being teammates. So there's definitely some mutual admiration there. But Wilson has said to the media during the draft process how cool it would be if he was reunited with Justin Fields. Now, look, he's got Justin Fields. So Garrett Wilson, does this probably prevent him from having that season that we really want out of him, where Garrett Wilson breaks through and could give us like a wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7 season? I don't think this is great for it, but if we can be real about Garrett Wilson, certainly Garrett Wilson has been a victim of circumstance in New York with pretty poor quarterback play, but this is a player that's never averaged more than 14.8 points as a pro. Can he be a 15-point per game scorer this year with Justin Fields? Absolutely. And I think he'll be hyper-targeted. And Justin Fields, again, we saw him with DJ Moore, elevated DJ Moore at times. That DJ Moore season, Justin Fields and him had fantastic chemistry. So this is one where, this is a win for me. Now talk about the other quarterbacks. Sam Darnold goes to Seattle. Sam Darnold last year earned this big contract. Darnold, of course, had 36 touchdown passes, 4,300 passing yards, fizzled out those last 2 games. Now, do we see a different storyline play out here if Darnold would have beat Detroit in that NFC North quasi-championship game the last week of the season? Maybe. So, and certainly if he would have beat the LA Rams in that wild card game, maybe he'd still be in Minnesota. They would have worked some stuff out. So whatever you want to take from it, Darnold had a great situation. He had Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. For a lot of the season, he had TJ Hawkinson. He had Kevin O'Connell calling plays and Aaron Jones beside him, but he did produce. It's a great situation. He took advantage of it, and he produced. Quarterback 9-point per game finish. Now, Seattle gave him the bag. And when it comes to Darnold, Darnold's 27 years old. So people talking about the Geno versus Darnold decision, are they close to one another? Could you make a case Geno's better this year? He wasn't better last year. And I know the situations, if they were flipped around, I think Geno would have absolutely crushed it in Minnesota. But in counting stat-wise, these guys both had, decent years last year. Darnold QB9, Geno QB15, but you get 7 years younger. They didn't want to pay 34-year-old Geno. They want to pay 27-year-old Darnold. So from a pure age perspective, that seems like the rationale, for better or for worse. Now, Sam Darnold, you got JSN there. I think that Seattle might select a wide receiver, My gut feeling, Brett Whitefield and I have talked about this. Matthew Golden would make sense there. That's a player who I think they could be right in that sort of wheelhouse for where they're picking. Maybe they go O-line in the draft. But Sam Darnold one's interesting. Geno Smith. Geno Smith goes to Vegas. Geno Smith, again, this is a great landing spot for Geno because he gets clarity about the next few years. Vegas wants him. Vegas paid for him. And Vegas now has a coach that has had immense success with Geno and Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll was the coach in Seattle when Geno took over. And when Geno finished as the QB8 overall, it was under Pete Carroll. Now, with Vegas, Geno gets Brock Bowers, the best tight end in football. Jacoby Myers, a very capable wide receiver. Probably you prefer him as a wide receiver too, but a guy that stepped up and is a very solid player. So Geno has two weapons there. One is elite. And Vegas, I think, seems like a team that's going to go add another wide receiver either through a trade or most likely the NFL draft. They could be in the mix for Ted McMillan. Vegas could also be in the mix for Ashton Genty. You don't go and make this trade for Geno Smith and hire Pete Carroll at 73 years old and then get Chip Kelly to come from Ohio State to be your OC and not kind of go for it this year. So I think Genty's in play, McMillan's in play. All those guys are in play. And if they pass on those two guys, I think in the second round, you'll see Vegas select a wide receiver or a running back. They're pushing the chips in. This is one for Geno. You have to like this one because Seattle didn't seem to like him as much as Vegas. I think Vegas is very happy to have him. And he gets reunited with the coach who he played best under. So win for Geno, absolutely. Talk about the running back spot. Najee Harris. Najee Harris lands perfectly. Lands in LA with Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh tried to recruit him to Michigan. Najee ended up going to Alabama, of course. Najee ends up being a first-round pick coming out of Alabama. But Jim Harbaugh tried to get him to go to Michigan. Najee's from California. He gets to go home to California, plays for the LA Chargers, and LA gave him the bag. And I know that's only 1 year, but they gave him over $9 million a year. So he's getting $9.25 million this year. That's money you're giving somebody, and you're going to give him the rock. And when it comes to Najee Harris, NFL coaches like him more than fantasy football managers because traits that Najee brings to the table. He plays every single game. He plays hurt. He gets 1,000 rushing yards every single year. And NFL teams like the fact that he's a former first-round pick. That always resonates with these teams because they evaluated them and they have a knowledge of them. So obviously, this is Greg Roman, went up against Najee plenty of times when Baltimore played against Pittsburgh in the AFC North. Jim Harbaugh has been trying to get Najee since like 2016. So when it comes down to it, Harbaugh finally gets his guy in Najee, and Najee ends up in a situation where the Chargers want to run. The Chargers also have a good offense with a good offensive line. Najee could have one of the best seasons he had since his rookie year. He's not going to give you rookie year Najee numbers. That ship is sort of sailed. He's not going to get that sort of receiving outlook. But can he be RB15 this year? Can he be RB18 this year? Yes. And I think he goes from a situation where he's sort of a RB3 to a team where he has a chance to have a strong year. We think about some of the success J.K. Dobbins had. When it comes down to Najee, he's going to have to score rushing touchdowns for this narrative, but LA is going to be in a position to get some rushing touchdowns. This is a huge win for Najee Harris. Flipping back over the wide receiver spot, Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk gets moved to the Houston Texans. Seems like last year, 7th round pick, they go and get Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon seems like a guy who's going to be cut. And instead of letting that player go to the open market, Houston sent a 7th round pick for him. Joe Mixon ends up being very, very good. Running back 1 in points per game this year. Had a number of big-time performances, had a very strong game in the playoffs. Joe Mixon, big-time win for them. They go get Christian Kirk. And Christian Kirk's one that's sort of a forgotten man in fantasy, but had a wide receiver 1 season, did it his first year in Jacksonville, was outscoring Calvin Ridley for a good portion of the year, sort of in that first Ridley year in Jacksonville. This year dealt with injuries, but Christian Kirk can play. He played well in Arizona, played well in Jacksonville, and now steps into a situation where he's taken over the Stephon Diggs role. And that Stephon Diggs role, super low ADOT role, but still was 15 points per game last year. Christian Kirk can bounce back. Is he going to get 15 points per game? No. But do I think he's a 12, 13 point per game guy in fantasy next year? That's in the wheelhouse. Christian Kirk can do that this year. The wide receiver 2 spot in Houston has been super valuable. So it's Nico Collins at the top, and then Kirk can be the secondary receiver on this team. Think about guys who have had success in that CJ Stroud offense. Tank Dell, very different player, but we're just talking about the availability of targets and role. Noah Brown had a very, very nice stretch. Stephon Diggs. So we're talking about a diverse group of players in terms of the talent that they bring to the field and the scheme and the usage. Those guys are different, but they all produced at a small sample size with Noah Brown, a medium with Stephon Diggs, and a larger sample size with Tank Dell. Kirk steps into that wide receiver 2 role. That's a win right there. So definitely an interesting one with the Christian Kirk pickup. And then we're going to talk about Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin returns to Tampa Bay, 3-year deal, turned down New England. Could have gone to New England and had a massive, massive role. Returns to his very good role in Tampa Bay. Godwin was 19 points per game last year before he went down. This is a player where Chris Godwin knows that Tampa Bay is probably his best chance to win. Tampa Bay has a really solid team next year. Baker Mayfield, back-to-back years of QB1 finishes. Baker Mayfield now will have Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan coming on, and Cade Otton as his tight end with a good offensive line. Then you put the dynamic Bucky Irving having a year 2 breakout. This is a really good offense. So Chris Godwin coming back to Tampa does a couple of things. Tampa's not going to take a wide receiver in the first round now. And I think this was an interesting one. I know I've mocked this. I know Brett Whitefield has talked about this, where if Godwin would have gone elsewhere, you could have potentially had a Emeka Egbuka, a player of that level, potentially Tampa Bay making a move up for Ted McMillan. But that ship has sailed. I think the wide receiver room is set. Tampa most likely drafts a player on the defensive side of the ball. So they've got a team that won a playoff game 2 seasons ago. Last year, lost a very close playoff game to Washington. And this year, they'll be the favorites to win the NFC South once again. Chris Godwin returns. That's a big one. Another player returning, Aaron Jones re-signs with Minnesota. Aaron Jones gets you 14.2 points per game last year. Played really, really well and had a really, really high level of volume. Had the most catches in his entire career in a season, and also had the most carries in a year in his season. So Minnesota used a 29, 30-year-old Aaron Jones as a higher volume play than he was used in Green Bay, where Matt LaFleur was synonymous with running back by committees. But Jones was in a great spot last year for Minnesota. Now, this probably prevents Minnesota from drafting a running back in the first round, like some have predicted. This is a Omarion Hampton, Travion Henderson landing spot. But I think that this doesn't preclude Minnesota from adding a good running back in the draft, maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick, and using them in tandem with Aaron Jones to sort of take a little bit of the load off Jones. I don't think they want Jones to be top 8 in running back touches this year in the NFL. I don't think that's the plan, but Aaron Jones returns to Minnesota. Another player, Mike Gesicki, returns to Cincinnati. You can cross them off the list of drafting a tight end in this class, probably. I mean, if Tyler Warren falls to them, I think they're still taking him with Gesicki, but at least with Gesicki, they bring a little continuity in the offense. And with the Trey Hendrickson rumors, it seems to me like Cincinnati's going defense in the NFL draft. And then sort of, let's wrap this up. Javonte Williams. Now, this is one where, depending on what you think of Javonte Williams, you could be really, really happy today. Or if you're a skeptic like I am, then you don't really care that much. I think with Javonte Williams, this is a guy who last year had 52 catches, top 5 in running back targets, and he still only averaged 9.3 points per game. This is a player who, for 2 straight years, has had sub 4 yards per carry. The Cowboys gave him $3.5 million, so it's not like nothing, but it's not anything that would prevent them from selecting a running back. But here's the annoying thing with Javonte being on the roster. They're going to use Javonte as a receiver out of the backfield. You can just see it coming. So even if this is a running back by committee situation, it's going to be an annoying presence with Javonte when healthy, compared with, potentially bringing some sort of a thumper between the tackles guy as the RB2. So this could be a little bit annoying if the running back you like lands to Dallas in like the second round, maybe that player sees fewer targets and slightly a little bit less rushing profile with Javonte. But do I think Javonte is going to pull a J.K. Dobbins here and be a guy that we're starting every week in fantasy at the beginning of the season with confidence? I don't think so. But I could be wrong on this one. And if I am, let me know in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to Fantasy Points for everything this offseason, from your free agent content to your rookie content, your NFL draft content, your dynasty rookie draft content, all the way up to redraft season, where we're going to help you crush your league. Fantasy Points has you covered for everything. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. If you like the video, give it a like.